Hi, parents, teachers, clinicians. I want to break down this question of why teens are cutting themselves, why it's so popular. Some of the statistics are showing 15% of teens are reporting self-harming, and we work with a lot of kids at Fire Mountain who harm themselves and self-harm, everything from burning, cutting, twisting, picking, scratching, all kinds of stuff. And it really is a pretty extensive phenomena that came up quite recently. The first thing I noticed when we looked at it is that I couldn't find any difference between a teen who cuts and a teen who uses. And what I mean by that is I wanted, and I asked around, I contacted psychologists and psychiatrists, and I asked around to say, what's the difference between someone who's cutting and someone who's using? Like tell me a difference so I know whether or not to treat them the same way that we treat addicts. And the experience of having every counselor and therapist and psychologist and psychiatrist tell me there is no difference. They go through the exact same craving pattern. The brain is reacting the same way. There's brain chemistry changes. And let's talk about the cycle that a cutter goes through, that someone who is self-harming, let's talk about what they go through as a cycle. First, there's an emotional stimulus that's overwhelming, so they begin a craving experience. Then from that craving experience, they start searching for something to use to bring them relief so that they can find a way to cope with the emotional stimulus. They scan and they find the thing to use, and then in finding the thing to use, they hide it. And once they have hidden it, they find a place to use it. Then they use it, and often it's in private, and then they feel relief. Once they feel relief, they start to feel guilt again. They start to feel pressure, and they start to feel stress. And so they purge. They get rid of the item that they use to harm themselves. And that guilt and that pressure and more life pressure creates an emotional stimulus that leads them to a desire to use again. And that's the exact, whether I was talking about cigarettes or whether I was talking about heroin or whether I was talking about cutting, it's the same cycle. It's the exact same cycle. So that's number one. Number two, what we know is that cutting releases dopamine in the brain, right? When you harm yourself, your brain automatically releases the feel-good endorphins so that you feel less pain. Well, when someone's dealing with depression, the simple act of cutting is actually providing them relief and happiness. So, of course, the brain almost starts to act as your own drug dealer. Right? I was explaining this to a young kid the other day, and he was saying, why would the brain say it's a good idea to cut? And I said, well, what does dopamine make a person feel? And he goes, makes a person feel happy. And he put it together. If the brain is saying, if you cut, you'll feel relief and I'll let you feel happy, well, then your brain is acting as its own drug dealer. So that is a way that this very toxic behavior of harming yourself, of cutting yourself open with a piece of glass or a tack, a nail, a razor blade, anything, these kids will find anything to use to harm themselves, is because they're trying to get their brain to release more dopamine. And once it does, they feel relief. So it makes sense that they're going to do this. So how do we start to treat it? How do we start to address it? And the big question is it a sign of suicide? And the answer to that big question, is it a sign of suicide, is no. Cutting is not a suicidal behavior. However, what we have found out with research is that the act of seeing your own blood, seeing the and doing the repeating the action of cutting yourself actually creates depression, which makes a person suicidal. So no, it's not a suicidal symptom at first. But the act of cutting creates depression, which makes a person suicidal. So what they're finding is, while a person who cut may not be suicidal, a lot of kids who are suicidal have been cutting. So there is a little bit of chicken and egg thing going on there, and it gets frustrating to deal with. As a parent, as a teacher, as a clinician, watching your child harm themselves. Are they doing it for attention? I have to say no. Most of the times they're actually not doing it for attention because they're covering the cuts up. If they were doing it for attention, they would do it publicly. They would show off their cuts, which they do to other kids who are cutting. It's in the same way that kids show off their new marijuana pipe or get together to do some cocaine, or there is a community. There's an entire online community about cutting. It's hard to watch. It's hard to stomach when you see their threads. But I belong to some of them because a lot of people, especially on Facebook, kids who are self-harming, they reach out. They say, my brother just died, and I really feel like harming myself, and they get a lot of support on this online community. So if you have a kid who self-harms, I really recommend that you watch these Facebook feeds and even post, how do I get my kid to stop? It is a therapeutic issue. It is something that needs to be dealt with therapeutically, because either the emotional overwhelm, the emotional hyperstimulus is environmental or neurological. It might be that there's some brain chemistry that's not working that needs to be addressed, either through supplements, vitamins, or Western medicine. To find that out, you're going to need to do some genetics testing. You're gonna need, don't try to get your kids put on medicines without doing some genetics testing or some neurotransmitter testing. That's like trying to fix a broken arm without even taking an x-ray. Like, if you don't know what's actually broken, why are you throwing a cast on it? And I understand that if you go to the doctor's office and say, my arm hurts, I can't use it, it's not functioning well, will they take pictures of the inside? I expect that they should do the same with the brain. And that's why at Fire Mountain, we do genetics testing and neurotransmitter testing. I want an x-ray of what's going on in the head before we start throwing pills at it, or throwing treatments at it, or throwing advice at it, because you might be doing stuff that's just not going to work. So I really want you to think about that. Cutting's become very popular. It's a tough one to go through. So what should you do if you come upon your kid, or your kid tells you that they've been cutting? Well, if it's fresh, my recommendation is to take them to the emergency room. So not only can they get treated properly so that there's no infection, but that they can have the social worker talk to the person and make a decision as to whether or not your child needs to be placed in a day treatment program for 3 to 7 days. If it continues, if cutting and self-harm seems to be a consistent way that your child tries to cope with difficult feelings, then long-term treatment might be necessary. The bottom line for cutting and self-harm is it's no different than drugs. It's the same thing. We're using something to avoid feeling the entire experience and to feel happy again. And it's not, it does not demonstrate good coping skills, nor does it demonstrate good brain chemistry. So it needs to be looked at. Okay, I hope that simplified it just enough. Parents, if you need more support, please go to our YouTube page at Fire Mountain RTC. Please check out our podcast at beyondriskandback.com. There are weekly episodes with experts and teenagers talking about their experience with addiction and recovery and with self-harm. And if you're pretty convinced that you might need a higher level intervention, please feel free to contact us here at Fire Mountain Residential Treatment Center at 303-443-3343. Hang in there, Mom and Dad. Hang in there. These times are tough. I know it's rough. And remember to take care of yourself first, take care of your adult relationship second, and take care of your child third, because in that way we do our best work with our kids. We got your back. Thanks for watching.